Morning, guys. I'm going to shoot another video. I've got some, I wanted to show you some clips and discuss some things. I had to take a recent haul of high voltage electrical equipment down to Tampa, Florida, but I had some issues on the haul, and I'll explain that in clips on this video. I just wanted to kind of get the opening clip in here. Got the truck in the shop and doing an oil change on it. We've got some bad weather here, very cold, icy, snowy conditions. So the vet is parked underneath the lift, and I don't want to take it out. I probably couldn't even get it out. There's so much ice that I wouldn't get any traction with it. But anyways, I'll bring you back and show you clips and discuss the haul. So what I'm doing is I'm back on my haul truck, the 74 Ford F750 that I am trying to build into a haul truck. But anyways, this isn't going to be part of the haul truck build. I'm just telling you that I'm back onto it again. As if any of you guys have followed it, I've had a problem with this trailing arm. When I bolted onto the rear end, the trailing arm height isn't the same from side to side, and it's creating a problem with the airbags. I need it to be fairly even with the airbags, so when I inflate the airbags to a certain pressure, that both sides of the frame are going to ride at the same height. The problem is, when I try and draw down the bolts, it draws down unevenly. So what I'm doing is, I haven't worked on this thing in a long time, and what I'm doing is I'm going to tear it back apart, taking a fresh look at it without having worked on it in a long time. Sometimes you work on something so much that your mind becomes, you get this one-track mind. So I've kind of pulled off of it for a while, not working on it, trying to just think about what could be the issue. You know, somehow my thought was that one of these trailing arms was bent. But when I got them and brought them into the shop and took them off of the sections of frame that it was on, it was cut off of another truck. I'd have to go back and even think about what it was. It was a cab over, but I don't remember if it was an international or a Freightliner. But they looked fine at the time. So when I went to put them on this axle, that's when the problem arose. So what I'm going to do is, that's not going to be part of this like shop update, but I'm just telling you what I was doing. I just unbolted the cross span between them that holds the airbags. Airbags are down there, but I just unbolted that off of there, loosened up this side. Going to try and reposition it again, get it down, and then I was thinking that there's a possibility that this cross brace between the two of them was misaligned somehow, and maybe causing it to do that. When I tried to tighten it down, it would twist it or torque it because that had been bolted down to it. So what I'm going to do is now take it apart. I'm starting to take it apart. I'm going to get it all the way apart, line everything back up again, bolt it down, and then see what happens without that airbag support crossarm being on there. I'm gonna probably bring you back, and I don't know whether it'll even be today. It's getting late in the afternoon, but what I'm going to do is bring you back and tell you about an issue I had on a haul, just to where this country is and where this country has gotten to and all sorts of things. But I'll bring you back and let you know. It won't be long. Just a quick shot of the truck before I get into the tale about my haul to Tampa and the problems that I had. I've got the truck in here just so that I need to adjust the emergency brakes and the clearance light, the second one from the right, the clearance bulb blew out and I had to replace that. So just to had the truck in here for that. Just a little side note here. I adjusted the emergency brakes on my truck. One side, the passenger side, right-hand side, is fairly easy to get to it. You can adjust it with a regular screwdriver or a emergency or parking brake adjusting tool. The one on the driver's side, the one on the passenger side is on the bottom, again, easy to get to. One on the driver's side, left-hand side, is a bitch. It's on the top. It's got this thing, this plug that's stuck into the slot, back and recessed in, and it's in the leaf spring is in the way of it. We bent a screwdriver the last time that we did it, and this is the best tool for it. You cannot get these parking brake tools into it. It just won't work because of the leaf spring being in the way. This thing, you get in there and you don't actually pry it, you twist it. But if you got a Ram 3500 leaf springs, driver side, bent screwdriver. Okay, I'm going to try and do this video on the haul that I had to make. Now, as of the filming of this, of me taping this, it was a couple of weeks ago. What happened is I do some hauling, both to and from. This guy in Niagara Falls that refurbishes high voltage electrical equipment. He has all sorts of electrical equipment. I probably showed you guys, if you follow my channel, some electric motors that I picked up down south, like 1,000 horsepower electric motors that I had to pick up down south for him. He has 2 yards full of used high voltage electrical equipment, from electric motors to like circuit breaker panels, high voltage circuit breaker panels, transformers, all sorts of transformers, like pole transformers all the way up to power station transformers. He has a transformer, well, he had 2 of them. He got rid of one of them last year, sold it to a power company. But the transformers are huge transformers. Like, I'm not sure of the voltage. The grid in New York State used to be 178,000 volts. I think they bumped it up to 220,000 volts, but I'm not sure. So the transformers, some of the transformers he has are these type of transformers. They weigh approximately 150 to 175,000 pounds. So transporting them is a big deal. Anyways, he had he has a bunch of high voltage electrical panels, and probably about a month ago, he had one going up to Canada. Actually, there was like 3 or 4 pieces of equipment on it. Some of them was transformers, not the 170 or 200,000 volt ones, but lower voltage transformers, maybe 50, 60,000 volts. So he had a piece of a transformer and then a piece of switchgear, the same piece of switchgear that I took to Tampa. He had a driver coming in, a Canadian driver coming in. One of the items was going to go up near Toronto. The other item was going over to Saskatchewan. And I helped load him, get him out of his shop and load him onto this guy's truck for him. But the thing that I hauled down to Tampa was, again, the same piece of high voltage switchgear equipment. And then I hauled a small electrical panel. I'll show you pictures of it. I loaded onto my trailer. But I hauled it on I went up and we loaded it onto my trailer on a Saturday, and I left directly from Niagara Falls towards Tampa on a Saturday with the intention of being there first thing Monday morning to unload it. It was going to an electrical contractor in Tampa. Make a long story short, the day we loaded it is the day before we were supposed to get a big storm. But the wind was blowing terribly. We had like 50-mile-an-hour winds when I left to go. So I was into a 50-mile-an-hour headwind all the way. It lasted all the way down until just north of Pittsburgh, where the wind subsided a little bit. The wind was still blowing, but it wasn't these terrible gusts that we were getting out of it. But where my problems began was in South Carolina. What it did is it took me on over to 95 in North Carolina to go down, and once I hit, it took me over to 95 in South Carolina. It was South Carolina. And once I hit it, it was a terrible road. It was extremely bouncy, rough, extremely rough. There's a story behind that too after I broke down and got to a truck stop. But anyways, I was driving along and I really didn't notice anything. I passed a tractor trailer that was going extremely slow. Again, the speed limit on Route 95 in this area is 70 miles an hour. Most of the trucks, including me, were going between 60, 62 because the road was so bad. But I passed a slower tractor trailer, and once I passed him, he started flashing his lights at me. Like, it wasn't just a signal that I could pull in. After I pulled in, he continued to flash his lights at me, so I knew something was wrong. I was right next to an exit. I got off at the exit. There was a Love's truck stop there. I use Love's a lot for gas because you get like free showers, free coffee, stuff like that. But anyways, I pulled into Love's, and when I pulled in and slowed down to almost nothing, I noticed that there was smoke coming out. So I had broke a spring on the trailer before, a couple of years prior. It turned out to be the exact same spring that I had broken. But anyways, I pulled into Love's, I noticed smoke, I backed into a parking spot, and there was a guy out beside his truck doing some cleaning on his truck, and he says, "You know you're smoking, right?" And I says, "Yeah, I know it." And I suspected it was a spring. I says, "I think I broke a spring, and on that rough road, and I think the tire is dragging onto the frame of the trailer. So I go back and I crawl underneath the trailer, and sure enough, the spring is broken. Now, this is on a Sunday afternoon. Love's has a service department. So I go over to their service department and I says, listen, I've got a trailer. Um, I broke a spring. Can you guys work on it? And I says, I'm not a semi trailer. It's a gooseneck. I'm kind of like a hot shot hauler. And he says, we can't work on anything below semis. The only trailers that we can work on are semi trailers. We can't work on gooseneck trailers or any kind of trailer like that. And I kind of knew this or had the suspicion before because on my old trailer I had 16-inch tires, 16-inch rims and tires on the trailer, and I knew that roadside service or Love's wouldn't fix those tires. They wouldn't even repair a tire. I had a hole in a tire on my truck, and those are 17-inch tires. They wouldn't. They says the smallest tire that we can service is 17.5. So the guy says to me, we can't work on it. And I says, man, can you make an exception? I mean, I'm kind of stuck here. And he says, no, we can't make an exception. I says, do you know of anybody? So he gave me somebody's telephone number. And I called. And I got a voicemail because probably it was because it was a Sunday. Anyways, I go back to the truck and I pinned my location to my grandson, and between the two of us, we started looking for roadside assistance or roadside service that could come out to the Love's truck stop and service me. And we really got nowhere with it. There was some tow truck companies listed that said that they worked on trucks, but I really didn't have any luck at all. None of them says, well, we don't work on stuff like that. We can't do springs. We only work on airbag suspensions now. This kind of thing. Besides that, I was in kind of a rural area of South Carolina, and there really wasn't any big sized towns or anything around me. So finally the guy the Love's guy had referenced called me back, and I told him what I had, and he says, yeah, I can come out and fix it, but I'm not going to be able to do it today. He says I'll have a guy out there first thing tomorrow. So I said, okay. So he calls me back later in the day. Again, this is Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. Calls me back and he says, can you give me the information off the trailer so I can start looking? And I gave him all the information. I told him what the axles were rated for. I gave him all the information off of the trailer. So he says, okay, I'll see what I can find, but there's nothing open right today. So first thing in the morning, I'll see what I can find. Late Monday morning, he calls me back and he says, listen, I'm having trouble finding somebody that deals with Dexter axles or Dexter springs. There's one trailer place that we kind of think might do it, but apparently they're not open. Now, this was some holiday. I forgot what the holiday was. Not a big holiday, but it was Monday was a holiday. Um, Again, not a, I forgot what it was, but if I figure it out, I'll put a thing in the video, a tag on it, what the holiday was. I'm also going to shoot or give you pictures of what's going on here, the broken spring, stuff like that. So he says the guy finally called me back and he says that from this trailer place, and I had called there too and got the same thing. Nobody answered. It went to voicemail. The guy called him back, and actually, I had talked to him first. I had recalled this guy because I had gotten a hold of a couple of trailer places, and they says we don't work on those things. One of the guys says I don't even know what you're talking about, and this was a trailer repair place, sales repairs. He says I don't know what you're talking about. So my guy that is going to fix it is called me back and he says, "Listen, I talked to this guy. He says there was a bunch of there was three different leaf springs, a 5, a 6, and a 7 leaf spring offered on that." I says, "Mine is 5. I sent you a picture of it." He says the best thing to do is I'm going to send my guy out. He's going to pull it off, and then we can take it to the trailer place and make sure that we've got the right spring. He comes out, and I'm not going to knock him. I'll show you a picture of him working on the trailer. The guy was older, probably 70, probably weighed 120 pounds, was a chain smoker. He had a service truck, and I'm going to assume that it might be his own service truck or his own tools in a service truck owned by the owner of this thing, but he had hardly any tools. He had an air impact, and he had a portable compressor just in the back of this truck. It wasn't mounted, wasn't a big compressor like most service vehicles have. It was just a small gas engine portable compressor. Had an air impact wrench. The air impact wrench wasn't even strong enough to take the lug nuts off of my wheel. Now I had a cordless Mac impact with a socket that fit the lug nuts on mine, and I let him use that to take the thing off. But it took him forever to get this spring off. Now, when I say it took him forever, actually, he had to cut the bolt off to get the spring to come off, cut the bolt off of the shackle that held it to get it off because he didn't have an impact big enough or wrenches like a ratchet with sockets big enough to get it. He didn't even have a wrench for the holdback on it. And it really wasn't that big. It was like a 7/8 bolt that goes through there. He actually had like a little 10-inch Harbor Freight pipe wrench that he held back on the thing with. Tried to hold back on it, but he couldn't get it to come off, so he cut it off. But most of the time that he was there, he spent in the parking lot chain smoking. Make a long story short here, he pulled it off, sent the guy out. We realized that at the same time the spring broke, what the smoke was from, not the tire rubbing on the frame, but I had burned out a bearing on the axle behind the one where the spring broke. and the hub um, uh, was kind of destroyed on the thing. Um, so he pulled the hub off also, got the hub off, but he had to cut it off. He didn't have a spindle nut wrench um, for it, and he had to cut it off with a grinder, the same way that he cut the bolt off for the spring. Going to make a long story short here. Both of the guys, after they had taken the spring off, they had gotten another spring, another hub. Both of them come out to put it on. They don't show up until like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They say we can't get they got the spring on, but the owner was working on the hub. The other guy was working on the spring. He couldn't get it on by himself. So the owner ended up having to help him. I actually ended up having to help both of them to get the spring back on. They just couldn't adjust it right to get the spring back in so that you could put the U-bolts around it. It was just a matter of jacking the axle up to get it into the position to get the U-bolts around it. Now we're working on, I was there from Sunday night. Monday came out to pull the spring off. Shows back up Tuesday at late in the afternoon. They get the spring on finally, but he needs to, he says the threads are buggered up on the spindle of the axle where he cut the nut off with the grinder wheel, cutoff wheel. He says, I can't get it on, I've got to get a die. Rechase the threads on the spindle and get a nut for the axle nut. So now, Wednesday morning, they come back out. First thing that happens is I don't know where he got this die from, but it breaks. So does his axle nut wrench because he tried to use the axle nut to thread it on to chase it after the die broke and his wrench broke. It was so cheap. Make a long story short, they finally got it. Had to go back out, get another die, another axle nut wrench. They finally got it. He lets it down. He says, pull the trailer forward or move the trailer, make sure everything's working good. I try to pull the trailer forward. The wheel where he replaced the hub is locked up. He says the brakes are locked up on it. He says, so I tried to back it up and then drive forward and back it up again, and I broke it free, but it was still dragging. He says, pull it out into the sun. I'll probably have to bleed the brake off. It was fairly chilly out there, so I mean people were wearing coats and stuff, so it wasn't like it was real warm or anything. It was fairly chilly. That's why he wanted me to pull it out in the sun. I pulled it out in the sun and I drove it over there, and I really couldn't feel it dragging, but then again, I've got a loaded trailer. He says, I can't bleed the brakes because I'm afraid the bleeder's going to break off of the thing. Common problem when you live up north where they use salt. But anyways, I says, okay, well, let me just go. I'm not going to go right away. I'm going to fuel up. I'm going to take a shower, going to change my clothes, stuff like that. And then I'm going to get on the road. So about 6 o'clock at night, I get out onto the road. I drive 20 miles down the road, down 95, and pull into a parking area for commercial vehicles, a truck parking area for commercial vehicles. I pull in. As soon as I pulled in and stopped, I noticed smoke coming from the back. I go back, and sure enough, the brake is dragging. So I call this guy up, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, night. He says I've got to be in Tampa at 7 o'clock the next morning. Promised the guy that I'd be there. He says I can't come out. I'm eating dinner. Um, but I've got another guy. I says don't send the original guy, the guy that's the chain smoker. Don't send him. He says, no, I've got another guy who doesn't work for me, but he's an independent, and I get him to come out. So he comes out and doesn't get there until 10 o'clock at night. And but what he did was disconnect the brake from it because he says, I can't stop it. What we'll do is we'll disconnect the brake, crimp the line off, I'll get in there with pry bars and pry the caliper, the pistons back away from the rotor, and that way you're going to be good. You just won't have one brake on the trailer. So that's what he did. I got out of there probably around 11:30. Got down to Tampa so that I was there at 7 o'clock in the morning. Unloaded it. This place, a very narrow road, big ditches on each side, hardly any shoulder to the road. And the shoulder was grass, and it had rained sometime within the near future, but it was real spongy. I didn't want to pull off onto that grassy area because I'm afraid I was going to get stuck. Very tight entrance, mailbox out by the road in a commercial spot, and I pulled in there, and he wanted me to loop around and pull up on the sidewalk so that he didn't have to take his forklift, that he was going to take this piece of high voltage switchgear off of my trailer with. He didn't want to drive his forklift onto the gravel or anything. He wanted me to pull up on the sidewalk. When I was pulling up on the sidewalk and trying to back up, he was directing me as I spun the thing to get the trailer in closer to the overhead door on the sidewalk. A bollard, there was a bollard there, and I caught it with my rear fender and crunched my rear fender. So now I've got two things that have happened. The spring, and now I dented the rear fender, and I'll show you a picture of that too. But anyways, I got unloaded. But the good thing of this whole thing is now, to this point, what I didn't tell you was how much this guy charged me. He's figuring up the bill, and I walk over to his truck. He says, I don't take a credit card. You got cash? And I says, no, I've got cash with me, but I probably don't have enough to pay you. He says, well, I don't know how to take a credit card. And I'm thinking, you're in roadside business and you don't know how to accept a credit card? But regardless of the point, he's figuring out the bill, and I walk over to the truck. And I see the bill he's working on. He had totaled up from yet the day before, and the bill was over $2,900. And I says, that doesn't say $2,900, does it? And he says, yeah, but I haven't added today's bill onto it. And I says, there is no friggin' way in the world I'm paying you $2,900 for what you have done on this truck. And he says, well, the spring was $265 and the hub was $500. And I says, okay, but the rest of it does not compute. Your guy was out here chain smoking most of the time that he was here. You were screwing around, your tools broke. You know, this isn't my fault that this stuff happened. And let me tell you something. This exact same spring broke 2 years ago up near Chicago, and we got a spring. We went to the store, a spring company, and got a spring from them, and then had a roadside service mechanic come out and put that spring on the trailer, and it was a girl. And she put the spring on basically by herself. Now I kind of helped her align the spring up into the hole after she had jacked the axles and stuff up properly. While she was jacking up, we kind of visually watched it and sucked the bolt through when she got to the right position. But she basically changed this entire spring by herself within 3.5 hours and charged me $495. And then the spring at that time was $200, so I ended up spending $695. And this guy, for the spring and a hub, wanted over 3,000 with the bill for that day, and I told him there was no way. So I ended up giving him $2,400. Then I had to pay the guy that came out that evening to fix a brake. So basically, between the fuel and what I had to pay him to get down to Tampa, I had spent as much as I got for the job to begin with. So in Salvation, when a guy called me that I haul generators for and told me that, hey, I have 2 generators. They're parts generators, which didn't turn out to be parts generators. One of them turned out to be good. I've got 2 of them, one in South Carolina and one in Virginia. Can you stop on or if you're down there, can you stop and pick them up and bring them back to me? So my Salvation was that. And I'm putting pictures of all of this stuff in. I'll put the pictures of the generators in. But then I came back to sub-zero temperatures and a lot of snow that we had gotten up here over that weekend. But I'll put pictures in. I'll have distributed pictures of all this stuff in it. But that's my story, and yeah, sometimes things don't work out.